Hey everyone. So today we're going to do another deep dive into psychology, therapy, and trans issues. I have the wonderful pleasure of being joined today by Dr. Z, who you may know from her YouTube channel of the same name. She's a clinical psychologist who specializes in working with trans and non-binary adults. She approaches therapy in a way that tailors care to each individual's unique gender journey and their unique gender transition needs, readily acknowledging that there is no one size fits all approach to gender transition or to just generally being trans. She has over 15 years of experience working with trans clients, has served over 1,000 trans clients in this time. She's created over 200 videos designed to help trans adults on their transition journeys and has written over 100 blog and article posts. So today, Dr. Z and I are going to talk a little bit about her journey into doing this work and her approaches to gender affirming care. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you so much for having me. When you started doing the bio and you said she tailors approach to individual selves, I kept thinking about how the hell can it not be tailored to the individual selves? That's the first thing that popped into my mind because one of the things I learned is how very person centric it is because
Mhm.
everybody has different set of goals. Everybody's goals change based on their circumstances and based on so many other things. So they just popped into my mind. But I'm excited to be here and to dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel the same way about therapy, but I think there's plenty of people out there who don't tailor it to the individual. So,
Yeah.
but we can definitely dive into that. But I guess kind of starting like zooming out, big picture, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of your path and what brought you to the field of mental health and being a psychologist?
Yeah. So I started initially, I was thinking about going into sex therapy and becoming a sex therapist because people talk to me about their sexual issues and I was non judgmental and open about it. And then when I got my master's degree in psychology, my first internship was in Portland at sexual minority youth resource centers that also saw gender nonconforming kids, so gender diverse kids. And that's where they had a small unit where they also saw adults. And that's where my first client was a trans woman. And I fell in love with all the dimensions and deep layers of what transition entails, how it is can be incredibly complex to dive deep into dysphoria and figure out what it is. How just dysphoria in of itself, I always call it beast on my channel because it's such a beast. It is unpredictable. It has zero pattern to it. And all of those aspects in combination of how is it that we actually form our sense of identity was really fascinating to me. So it just felt just immediately a right fit. When you see something and it
Hmm.
just feels like it's for you, and it just kind of went from there. And I've been loving doing it ever since. I can't imagine doing anything else. As you know, that's the only thing I do. I specifically focus on transgender and non-binary issues. I don't touch any other issues at all. In fact, if a client comes to me and they have something that they would like to work through, I refer to somebody else because it's just outside of my competency at this point. So yeah,
Okay.
and I love it.
Yeah. Kind of fell into your lap in a way, it sounds like, and
Yeah.
it just kind of has gone from there.
Yeah. And people sometimes, so it's interesting because there's two, right? Sometimes people feel that the space should not be, well, how should I say it? Cis providers should not be in the space, right? It's better to have transgender providers, which I 100% agree. And we do need more transgender mental health providers. On the other hand, people are always surprised how can I know the issues to such depths the way I describe them on the channel, as if I am literally sitting inside of their headspaces. And I think
Mm-hmm.
part of that is that anybody, regardless of their experience, whether somebody had transgender experience or not, anybody can really listen and be open to listening to somebody's narrative. And when you really listen, you really then have capacity to understand. But sometimes people get really surprised because they assume that I'm also transgender because I am on platform where I just focus on this. And then they get surprised. How can I know things at such deep level? And again, if every provider just listened, I think that
Mm-hmm.
everybody has capacity to get to such deep level. You don't have to go through experience to understand.
Yeah, I think a big part of that too is like just really centering clients as the experts of their own experience too. And it sounds like that's probably a
Exactly.
big part of like how you approach your work.
Exactly.
So, could you tell us a little bit about like what like an initial session of gender therapy might look like for you? And I mean, I know it probably varies depending on the client, but I'm wondering if like there's kind of initial steps or kind of typical ways that you approach a first session.
Um, I am, I would say I'm very orthodox in how I do therapy. When I say orthodox, what I mean is, oh, unorthodox, what I meant by unorthodox. Most providers are what we typically been taught at school, right? A patient comes in, you spend a lot of times collecting histories and you dive into issues. You tend to sit back and say very little, give very little input to the client, and mostly you're just reflecting back summary of what the person just said.
Hmm.
Even though my backdrop is in Freudian and Jungian school of thought, I am very relational and I'm very interactive in therapy, primarily, Chloe, because for two reasons. Well, for three reasons, I would say. One, my personality is direct, and I'm not going to change my personality because this is who I am. So I have to be me in therapy. Two, I don't believe that for adults, gender therapy has to take forever. I
Hmm.
just don't believe that because so much of what adults need, if they do decide to transition, because it's not for everybody, but if they do decide to undergo transition, so much of that occurs outside of psychotherapy. So I believe what's really important is to help people figure things out, help people understand what they're dealing with, and help them figure out what they need to do. And so for that reason, the therapy with me is very unorthodox. And the third thing is because I'm so specialized, I am able to, when a client comes in, to zone in and to
Hmm.
be able to block everything out. I heard one time, there's a podcast, gender podcast, and I heard one time they say that when you go to gender specialist, all they see is transgender issues, or all they see is gender dysphoria. And I really disagree because I
Hmm.
had numerous occasions where I had to tell a client that this looks like, on the surface, looks like gender dysphoria, but what you're telling me is that you feel completely comfortable and neutral with your gender assigned at birth, but there's some social aspects you're not comfortable with,
Hmm.
which leads to, hey, let's learn a little bit more about your gender expression and gender role because you're so comfortable with your gender assigned at birth. So I disagree that all you see is gender issues. Actually, things that a really good gender therapist will be able to discern what else might be going on. So, because
Hmm.
my view is so narrowed, therapy with me, kind of unorthodox, you come in, because most of the clients I see, they fall into, I would say, age 30 and up.
Okay.
Almost every single one of them has been suffering with gender dysphoria for at least 5 years, at least, and at the most 2, 3 decades. So when people come in, it becomes very clear just by listening how they talk about their relationship to their gender assigned at birth that they're suffering with severe dysphoria. So it becomes a slam dunk. It's kind of idiotic for me to spend 6 months evaluating them to confirm
Right.
something that I see immediately and something that they know immediately. And they're looking for me as, hey, is this really what's going on? Or am I going crazy here?
Hmm.
So it things with me happen fast. Of course, if
Yeah.
there's clients I have that are working through resistance and fears, and they need a different pace, and I adjust my pace depending on where you at to meet you there. But for a lot of people, they just need to figure out how to create a plan and how to move forward.
Yeah. And definitely is tailored to the client.
Exactly.
Yeah. From your perspective, um, what would you say are like some of the essential components that would make gender affirming and care like actually gender affirming? Because I don't know, sometimes in my experience, I may encounter things where it's like gender affirming care is advertised, but it can look very different to different people. And sometimes it's not actually gender affirming, if that makes
Mm,
sense, depending on the setting. So I'm wondering, just like in your experience with so many years working with trans
uh,
clients, like what do you think are some of those like critical components to like gender affirming care, maybe specifically as
yeah.
a therapist?
Oh, so I'm not a big fan of word affirming because
Mm-hmm.
it's so abused today, and people things that affirming means client comes in and they say how they feel about themselves, and the therapist immediately says, yes, that's it, right?
Right.
And that's not how it happens. I mean, we are clinicians at the end of the day. So I like discerning, but I
Mm,
hate the word discerning too because it's almost gatekeeping. But I think for professionals who really know what they're doing, discerning is just the right word. Today, the challenge is we have so many providers that are gender affirming or LGBTQ friendly. I mean, I don't even know what that means, friendly. Of course, you have to be friendly to every client demographic.
yeah.
You're therapist, right? I think one of the red flags that a client has to watch out for is when you come in and you start talking, do they have a vocabulary? Do they have a
Hmm.
sense of understanding? Even in the way they're asking you questions, you will know whether you're talking to somebody who knows what they're doing.
Right.
I had people who said they went to somebody who would say they're gender therapist and provide affirming care, and they had to educate the therapist about
Oh,
vocabulary, and that's not all right because you're exchanging money. Even if you have insurance, you're paying for that insurance, so you're
right.
exchanging money for service, and that's a red flag. Another red flag is when you come to provider, and especially for those people who are listening who have a strong sense of who they are, they're not confused, they're not, oh, maybe I have gender issues. They're like, I know I've been struggling with this, I know I have gender issues, I need to come in and I just maybe need to get approval. Some states still need approval for hormones, right? Need that
Hmm.
letter. And provider says, oh, I need to evaluate you for 6 months. That's also a red flag to stay away from provider. I'll tell you why. The DSM criteria, one of the criteria to qualify for the diagnosis, according to DSM, is the symptoms have to last 6 months or more.
Hmm.
Now, if you are a novice and don't know what the hell you're doing, you will be going literally 6 months of psychotherapy.
Right.
If you're somebody who knows what they're doing, you will say, okay, when did your symptoms started? And for majority of people, it'll be early childhood, puberty, post-puberty. And so if you look at the time span where they're at now, they have spent way more than 6 months dealing with the symptoms. So those are my two biggest red flags that you're not dealing with gender affirming care. Um, Affirming to me is like oxymoron because we have to affirm. When you come and you tell me
Right.
your truth, this is your truth, right? But I also have to help you discern what does your truth mean to you and what do you need to do with that truth. So yeah, so that would be my red flags. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I completely agree that I think gender affirming care almost feels like a buzzword in a way,
Yeah,
that it's like thrown around a lot, like you're saying, to the point where it's like it loses its meaning and may not even make sense on the surface. It's like LGBT friendly. I've seen that a lot too, and that just I'm like
exactly.
that
What
doesn't that
what is
doesn't
that?
that doesn't tell me much.
What?
It's like you're friendly to your clients. Good.
Right. So it's very I don't like the word affirming too.
Hmm.
I also don't like it because we shouldn't be putting the power and credibility to therapists to affirm things for you. You should be owning your identity, right? So
Hmm.
you should lead, or if you're not at a place where you can affirm it yet, because it can be very difficult. We live in a world that is becoming more and more anti trans. So it can be very difficult to believe and own who you are. The therapist should help you how to get that confidence and to
Hmm.
normalize many things you've been told so that you can affirm it for yourself, right? So when we say gender affirming, to me, it's almost like all gender diverse people are just lost people who don't know until they get into therapy, and the therapist is like, oh yeah, by the way, let me affirm it for you. And I just, it's I can look at a person and hear them and I can confidently say, yes, this is definitely gender dysphoria, but your identity at that point is to figure out what that means for you. Because remember, having gender dysphoria doesn't mean you're transgender or non-binary. It means you're having gender dysphoria, which is any kind of dissonance with your gender assigned at birth. But
Hmm.
which identity then resonates with you, that's for you to figure out.
So you've touched on this like a little bit with some of the previous questions, but looking at your website, I saw the terms of like describing your services as like no fluff gender therapy, which I really like that. Um, and like I said, we touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little more about what you mean by this, and also thinking about like some of those common shortcomings that you may see or hear about with other providers when it comes to like working with, trans clients, gender identity, gender transition, and probably most importantly, how would you see your approach as like overcoming some of those common pitfalls that other providers may be encountering?
Yeah, so it's multi. You ask. There's several things that you ask in
Yeah.
the employees. So the first one, the no fluff. This is just exactly who I am. I'm no fluff. Just like we're doing this interview, I share with you exactly what's on my mind, exactly what I see,
Hmm.
exactly how I see my work. And for me, anybody who ever worked with me, even for one session, have known how much direct perspective they were able to get. Like I said, I don't hold back. I will share. I will give you as much as I can within that one session. So it's not even uncommon for people to come and have a single session to confirm what they're struggling with is dysphoria, if they truly struggle with dysphoria, and I see it in that session, and for me to outline at least 6 months of a plan, and then here, go and just start doing it, and here's how it's going to unfold for you given your circumstances. So
Hmm.
it's really important for me, especially Chloe, not only because I'm so specialized. The more you become specialized, the less you're inclined to hold back because there's so much you can give.
Right.
And also, too, I don't take insurance, and I know how much I charge an hour. I'm not cheap. So for that reason, I also feel it's important to deliver that value. So those things become significant. In terms of your other part of question of other providers and how I avoid pitfalls that they tend to fall into, in my experience, the biggest pitfall providers go through is not knowing what the hell they're doing. In my opinion, psychology really needs to be regulated to the extent of how many areas we need to specialize in. And in my opinion, it
Hmm.
should be no more than three. I can't imagine when you go to a provider and on their website, you know how they list what they focused on, and it's everything under the sun.
Right.
And I can't imagine how can you possibly help with all of those issues. I know for a fact you can't. Of course, we all went to school, and I can generally help with everything, generally speaking.
Right.
But let me tell you, if somebody came to me right now and they wanted to work on, I don't know, let's say mood disorders, struggling with mood disorder, of course, I would probably know how to spot it, potentially diagnose after prolonged time. Let me tell you, it's going to take me a long time to help this person because I'll be operating from a place of not knowing. I'd
Right.
probably be reading something on a side, and I'll be wasting their time and money and prolonging their suffering because of my inadequacy. For that reason, I think the biggest pitfall is when we take on too much,
Hmm.
right? I watch out for that pitfall with myself, even though I only focus on gender issues, by constantly talking and writing about it. The more I write about it, the more research I'm doing. The more research I'm doing, the more I'm staying on top of what's going on. For example, right now, today I was working on a blog on trans men and how testosterone affects vaginal entropy for those who have not had bottom surgery, and how much it really affects their sexual life.
Hmm.
And that's something that's becoming more and more common. A lot more people are talking about it, and it's a concern. And people need to know that that can happen, right?
Right.
Part of deciding to go on hormones is to know, hey, this and this can happen. You kind of playing with those odds for yourself, and you're making the best decision for yourself as a person. So, being educated, being on top of research, reading books, constantly reading on new books that are coming out on gender issues, especially written by transgender non-binary folks, is for me it's like crucial. And the biggest part of staying on top of things is to interact with my YouTube channel, because I read every single comment that everybody writes, and that way I constantly in a sphere of what are my community, the transgender community I work with, what is the most struggling with, what is their concern.
Hmm.
Right now I can tell you that everybody's concerned is safety. They're
Yeah.
afraid for their safety because of all the anti-trans legislation. So every other comment is, what do I do? I'm terrified. I can't leave my home. I'm becoming more isolated. One person commented and said, I'm hoarding estrogen because what if we're going to run out of estrogen? So this is a big concern. So if you're not in the midst of your people issues, you're just not going to be equipped to help them, because then you're operating miles away.
You're operating from a place where
Yeah.
you don't know what you're doing and you're learning as you go, which is not always the most helpful for a
Which is
client.
fine in the beginning. I mean, I
Hmm.
started, I didn't know any of this. So I made mistakes with people pronouns, and
Yeah.
apologized and tried my best. But I made it always clear that, hey, my level of knowledge is very limited. So I think as long as you're transparent
Yeah.
and a client comes to you and you say, hey, I know it says I'm gender therapist or LGBTQ friendly, but you're really my first client. And let the person decide, do they have time to spend with you or not?
So kind of like touching on, you mentioned like the YouTube channel and, creating content, kind of getting your finger on the pulse, so to speak, of what's going on with
Yeah.
various people in the community. I guess I was just wondering, like, in some background, what was kind of the process around like creating the YouTube channel? Because I mean, if I have the timeline correct, you're probably like working with clients for a good number of years before
Yes.
starting the YouTube channel. So kind of wondering what kind of led to that.
So what led to YouTube, and I think YouTube is maybe going on fifth year. I don't, oh my God, I don't even, is it four? Maybe, yeah, probably going fourth or fifth year. What started YouTube and prompted the YouTube is were two things. One of the things is I was realizing that because of what I decided to charge and not taking insurance, I was having people reach out to me who needed a gender specialist and did not have access to.
Mm.
And two, I started to see people emailing me with their questions who were in parts of the country where they didn't have access to any kind of even LGBT friendly therapist. So I thought that it was not only right, but I think it's very ethical when you're so focused on one specialty and there's not a lot of people who maybe just solely focus on one area to be able then to utilize the platform to start sharing with people information so that they can
Mhm.
have access to it. So that was the goal. And it was and still is incredibly important for me to make sure that each video is standalone depthful video, that it's not a watery content as part of, I don't know, some business strategy marketing. Like,
Right.
here's a little snippet, come work with me. It's more like, hey, this is what you might be going through, and this is why you're going through, so you can understand yourself. So no matter where you're at in the country, you can at least start to have a little bit of building blocks of why you experience what you're experiencing, because gender dysphoria is incredibly complicated, and
Mhm.
the way it manifests is wildly different for every person, and it depends on so many factors. So there's no two people who have exact same experience of gender dysphoria, and depending on your age, where you grew up with, the background you had, it's all going to influence how you're going to experience it. So understanding that is very important. So that's how I started, and now I love it.
Yeah, it seems like it. You've put out hundreds of videos at this point and probably helped countless people, which I think is really wonderful.
I hope so. I hope so.
That kind of made me think of we talked a little bit about like gender dysphoria and like how this is complicated and it shows up differently and in various ways for different people. I guess I was just wondering out of like curiosity, like, what are your thoughts on like the gender dysphoria diagnosis? Um, because like it's my experience as a trans woman and my experience in the community, there's lots of mixed feelings on the diagnosis, and I think lots of experiences of gender dysphoria that fall like outside of the diagnosis, like it's a very narrow kind of look
Yeah.
at trans people's experiences. So I was wondering if I could just pick your brain on that.
What are your thoughts on it?
What are my thoughts? I don't like the fact that there has to be a diagnosis with the way like our medical system is set up in terms of like getting coverage for care. There's like a lot of research that I've done in like my grad program has looked at like trans people's experiences of gender dysphoria to kind of get from like how are people in the community describing it, and
Yeah,
because a lot of older research, a lot of the diagnosis was created by cis people,
totally.
um, kind of making assumptions and putting boxes around trans and non-binary people. And I feel like among other things, like gender dysphoria doesn't really capture the piece of like living in an oppressive environment. I feel
Yeah,
like it's solely like focused on like one's internal experience, which is definitely a big part of it, but it doesn't take into account like all the factors of just like living in this world and interacting with people, interacting
right.
with systems on a daily basis, and how that contributes to how we view our gender, how other people view our gender, the distress we may experience. So, I mean, I guess long story short, I don't love the diagnosis, and I think it's very stifling.
Yeah,
I don't
it
think
is.
we should have to have it to get access to medically necessary care.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Um, I I'm not a big fan of DSM, because I know the history of DSM, and I know that up to this day we have stuff in DSM that is, in my opinion, is not even psychological distress. So I'm not a big fan, and I'm very biased in a sense of how I approach DSM, because it's, if you're using DSM, which is Diagnostic Statistic Manual, for those who don't know, that psychologists used to follow criteria to diagnose. If you use it to a T without understanding the history behind it, I think that gender dysphoria is deeply misunderstood in a sense of what it means. Because in the DSM, historically, we have gone through gender identity disorder, right? It went through reiterations. And at first, it was tied to a deeper sense of who you are, as in your sense of who you are is pathologizing.
Right,
Your sense of identity is a problem. Now it's gender dysphoria, which is misunderstood because it's still tied to what it used to be. If we could clean gender dysphoria from its history, which we can't, but if we were, I think the best way to approach it is gender dysphoria, all it is a psychological distress which a person feels when they feel incongruency. And it is a psychological distress. And
hmm,
people, as a result of it, feel depression and anxiety and suicidality and all of the other stuff. And it's important for the public to understand how psychologically distressing the incongruencies, not your gender identity is what's
right,
causing you distress, but the incongruency that is so debilitating, right? For me, I see gender identity as a very natural unfoldment of part of personality. And it's basically, reconciling our body mind splits that some people experience and the environment they live in. I think it's completely natural. And I think some people are predisposed, and some people are more predisposed to be cis and more comfortable with their gender assigned at birth.
mhm,
But I think people experience gender dysphoria a lot of times, um, that diagnosis unfortunately becomes necessary because you can't get coverage. And I'm
right,
afraid to even bring up idea of removing it, because then it gives power and ammunition to everybody else to say, oh, well, then it's cosmetic, well, it's subjective sense of self.
right.
I think it's still important to acknowledge that distress is still there. And I think we need to talk more about what gender dysphoria is, to
Hmm.
unravel it for the public, because people obviously have a very inaccurate meaning. But I agree with you. It's obviously and clearly, anybody who knows anything about gender dysphoria, it is not a psychological illness. It's not a mental
Hmm.
illness. It's a distress. And how we know it's not a mental illness? Because once a person starts feeling congruent, all of the psychological distress feelings go away.
I don't know, as you're talking, it's making me think about like the previous diagnoses, like gender identity disorder, and how
Yeah,
it was and still is in many ways about pathologizing the individual as opposed to it's like something's wrong with your identity and we need to fix that, or you're the problem and we need to fix that, as opposed to focusing on like this is a distressing experience for the individual. How can we support them without
exactly.
like, because there's nothing wrong or pathological about being trans or having any gender identity that doesn't match our gender and sex assigned at birth.
Exactly. No, I totally agree. And there's a lot of histories there. I mean, homosexuality used to be in DSM.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of histories there, and it's very it's dark, and it does stems from a lot of cis providers sitting around creating what they think is a cluster of diagnosis. Anytime we have a minority group that doesn't fit the majority concepts or ideas, suddenly there's a need to diagnose things. There's suddenly need to label and to pathologize, so that way people can create us them gap, right?
Right.
Because you don't have to, that way you don't have to acknowledge other individuals. And so it's the same thing with sexual variability, right? People are saying, well, there's only two sexes. Well, no, there's not two sexes. There's more than two sexes. Science has already confirmed it. There's more variability than XX and XY chromosome assignment. If you look at also at sex as only chromosomal assignment, and we continue to negate this variability in nature, by saying that, well, typically, you can't just say typically. That's just not
Hmm.
how things work. So it's really important to recognize that you may believe that majority of people are comfortable with their gender assigned at birth, but the reality is that there's also a big majority of people who are not.
Easily millions. It's well over a million in this country alone. And I
Exactly.
imagine that's probably a underestimate, just as more. I feel like the numbers have been rising in recent years, but I feel like that's in at least significant part due to more and more people getting the language and feeling more comfortable identifying and not some mass explosion of trans people.
Yeah, I don't think it's mass explosion. I always look at the numbers rising as people have language, people have
Hmm.
understanding. I know this because I had people who are 70 years old come to me and say, I've been identifying as, non-binary for as long as I could live, but only now I'm realizing I have access to care and I can finally be part of the statistic of
Yeah.
documenting the gender diverse experience because only now we're paying attention and only now I can have access to the top surgeries that I always wanted. So we have a lot of people who've been living with their gender and but have not been part because they have never had access to the medical care. So they're coming to the forefront, that
Hmm.
adding to the numbers. And we also can't disregard, we do have a lot of youngsters who are, because they're sitting in this gender explosion, it's natural. They're questioning who they are. That's a great
Yeah.
thing. And a lot of them who are questioning and think they're trans will turn out not to be. And a lot of them will turn out to be trans. And that's a great thing. This is all part of that exploration. So we have to keep in mind the spikes of the numbers mean a lot of different things. But
Hmm.
in general, yes, there should be an increase because things are opening up now. And I think that's a great thing because we're now understanding how significant it is and how important it is for our humanity to have
Hmm.
this natural variance.
Absolutely. So that kind little bit of stress, but kind of makes me think of one of my other questions. Learning language and, people starting to like maybe question their gender. Are there kind of main primary certain pieces of advice or encouragement or support that come to mind when you think of somebody who's like maybe at the very beginning of their gender transition or considering gender transition, kind of wondering like what you might say or what you might do?
So is this for people who are wondering and still questioning their gender identity or know their gender identity and want to transition?
How about both?
Okay, okay, because to my mind immediately goes, oh, is there different? I like to see patterns because I've seen patterns
Hmm.
over the course of my career. So to the individuals who are just questioning, let's say they're like starting to realizing that there's a lot more to my gender, and maybe I'm starting to feel some elements of incongruency with my gender assigned at birth, but they're still not sure yet, right? Maybe dysphoria is not as dominant or present. They're wondering, they're curious. The best way is to keep exploring and to keep asking yourself those questions because, like you said, it is the individual sense of self in relationship to the gender.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I see a lot of times people don't think about is that your gender identity doesn't always has to be in conformity to gender expression and to your gender role. A lot of people think that, oh, I just want to express myself as other gender representations while I feel comfortable and static with my core identity. And then they feel a conflict because then they feel like, well, if I express myself, then maybe that's the genders that I'm most comfortable with. You have to really sit with all of those nuances and all of those feelings because, as we know, there's a lot of people who may feel comfortable in their, for example, masculine identity, but like to occasionally express themselves feminine or like to take on a completely different gender role.
Right.
All of those don't have to conform and fit together like a piece of puzzle. There's a lot of room here because human complexity is nuanced and we're nuanced and we're meant to have all of those layers within ourselves. So I would say explore, ask yourself questions, start journaling, asking yourself all of the things. What does the gender mean to me? What does identity mean to me? How do I like to show up in the world? How do I like when people address me by my pronoun?
Mhm.
How does that feel? Just start asking those questions. And then if you feel like the questions are not enough, start some element of social transition, right? Modifying how you appear to the world, changing things about yourself and see how they feel. For people who know who they are, like, no, they're not, they're like, I don't have to question anything. I know for sure. I've been struggling with this. and they're ready to transition and they don't know
Mhm.
where to begin. I think it's really important to first ask yourself, what are your goals? Like, what are you trying to achieve? Is your goal passing? Passing is not everybody's goal. Is your
Right.
goal to fully pass? If it is, then what does it mean for you? Like, how far do you need to take it then? What kind of things you have to go through?
Mhm.
If passing is not your goal, what is your goal? Is your goal to start expressing yourself so you can feel comfortable until dysphoria goes away? Everybody has different goals. Some people, they come to me and they say, you know what? I feel like I'm too old, which is, I think is not true. You're never too old, but I feel like I'm too old and I feel that it's just not worth it for me at this time. What's the least I can do? Because I'm in a lot of distress. Then I wonder, well, can the least you can do take hormones and just get that peace of mind and that calm that comes with having the right hormone in your body? If yes, great, let's do that. So again, ask yourself what your goal is. Be clear
Mhm.
about your goal. And then after you figure out what your goals are, ask yourself, how realistic is it to achieve your goals given your circumstances? And this is
Mhm.
hard and this is painful reality snapshot of your goals because the truth is some people have resources and money to go to the best surgeons if they want a surgery. Some people don't and they have
Right.
insurance. Some people have great insurance. Starbucks insurance covers all the great stuff. Some people have shitty Blue Cross Blue Shield that doesn't cover anything, that fights with them. I'm not saying that looking realistically should stop you from your goals ever, but it should help you to start figuring out how can you go around those obstacles and
Right.
to realize that you may anticipate them versus blindly running into things and then struggling very much so because you have not outlined all of the things. So that's what I would recommend is to do that and just be realistic with what you want and then outline how you're
Mhm.
gonna make it happen and do it.
And it sounded like from how you described your approach to therapy earlier that some of your kind of initial approaches might involve some of that, like creating that picture, creating that goal, creating that roadmap, so to speak. Is that right?
Yeah, so when I create roadmap, what I call roadmap or the goal map for people, it's for people who know who they are, like the individual you just asked me about, and want to transition. And they're like, I don't know where to start. So they come in, and it's my job, giving my expertise and being able to work with so many people to see not only what is their possibilities within their reality, because I ask, what are your finances? What is your insurance? Where do you live? So as I am asking, I'm making a plan in my head because I know immediately how far they are from great doctors, whether all the good doctors can take their insurance, how long they
Mhm.
will have to wait, right? I'm outlining all of the things. And it's also important for me as I talk to the person, as a psychologist, I get a sense. How resistant are you? What is holding you back? Some people, they come to me and they're in a marriage and their partner still doesn't know. They're like,
Mhm.
this is what I want to do. And I'm like, this is great. Why are we whispering? Maybe you should tell your partner first because how are you going to go through changes without them noticing? That becomes the first thing you need to acknowledge. But yes, the roadmap is essentially based on what you told me, based on your circumstances, and based on my expertise. Here is my opinion on what is the best options for you, and then I email you and outlined, boom, boom, boom. And everybody's different. Some people they tell me, like I just worked with somebody who said, I'm not ready to come out at work. This is somebody who identifies as trans feminine. They haven't started anything, and they're like, I do not want to come out at work because I don't want to lose my employment. I'm like, valid. Hey, you
Mhm.
can be 6 months up to a year on feminizing hormones without any drastic big changes at your age. This person is much older. So I'm like, you know what? It's definitely doable. It's definitely an option. You don't have to come out until you're ready. You don't have to start presenting at work, but you can start initiating some things.
Mhm.
Voice training if you care about your voice, facial hair removal if you care about facial hair removal, other things, body hair removal if that gives you dysphoria. You can start incorporating a lot of other elements that are not visible on the surface and nobody bats an eye, and you can feel confident and comfortable and take control of your life.
Question that kind of popped in my mind too, as we're talking about like the therapy you provide. What kind of went into the decision of not taking insurance, kind of being out of network? Because I know that's kind of like ongoing conversation for a lot of therapists as they're kind of going into the field.
My decision not to take insurance was because of multi factors. One of the factors was insurances don't provide adequate reimbursement. I
Mhm.
knew how much to reimburse, and I knew that based on the reimbursements, for me to be able to pay my student loans and to be able to just create time to create content or just afford my lifestyle in Los Angeles, I knew that based on that, I would have to fill up my schedule 10 clients a day easy. And I knew
Wow.
if I were to do that, I would not be providing good service.
Mhm.
So I decided to go a different route and I decided to be very clear about who my clients are. And my clients are either people who do have financial resources or they're people that have insurance that will cover therapy with me after I send them the super bill.
Okay.
So that's why I list my prices on my website because it's important for me to be transparent so that when you see as a viewer, you can immediately see, am I in your range? Is it feasible for you?
Mhm.
Right? Instead of like, oh, finally I found specialist. I'm so excited. Oh shit, you're outside of
Yeah.
my reach. It's just so, I always, it's my pet peeve when I see people not put prices. I'm one of those people that if I see something, a program something service that I would like to buy, the first thing I do personally is how much does it charge, right? Because then I have to think, can I dream about this or is this something outside of my range?
Right.
So it's important for me, but it just was a personal decision, also based on the clients I wanted to work with.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. No, it's not an easy decision, but I've heard just lots of horror stories about just the process of reimbursement and also, like you said, it not
Yeah.
even being enough in a lot of cases,
Yeah.
let alone just the process of navigating getting the reimbursement. And just a couple other questions just in like my work on YouTube and work in the community have had like lots of partners, parents, other family members kind of reach out to be like, what do I do to support like
Yeah.
my loved one who is coming out or thinking about coming out? So I'm wondering if there's like any advice that you would give to, partners, parents, family members, close friends, whoever who knows someone who's come out as trans or non-binary, like in order to like help them process the transition, support their loved one.
Segment them again. I'm thinking about 10. I know I'm crazy.
I know
For
my questions are long.
that's good. For partners, for partners, I would recommend, and by the way, I have 7 series videos just for the partners
Mm,
that go over of what they may experience on the YouTube. For partners, what I would say is first and foremost, they need to decide if they're able to maintain a relationship. And it's okay to decide, but
mhm,
it's what's not okay is, in my opinion, to throw ultimatums. I will
mm,
stay if you do. We're all adults. So if they decide that they would like to stay and they would like to support their partners, um, then they fall now on the category of family and friends who are also supportive. And the best way, in my opinion, that anybody can support is just be there. Just be
mhm,
there and just ask, what do you need? Do you need to share anything with me and for me just to be a holding space? Do you need for me to help you with some resources? Don't worry about not knowing or not understanding. It's not your job to understand, right?
mhm,
It's not really your job to figure this out. You can, of course, if you want to grow as a person and be more assertive and more mature about what's going on in the world and what's happening in our society today and how progressive we're becoming. I hope you would learn about gender issues and how people with dysphoria, what they have to go through. But you don't have to really understand what it's like because you won't be able to. Even I, no matter how I can conceptualize understanding, it would be stupid of me to say I understand because I can't. It is not my
mhm,
experience, right? So again, the best you can do is just be there. Ask them how can they be supported. Like, what do they need? My hairdresser recently said, "My cousin just came out, and do you any idea how I can? What can I do for them? I was thinking about buying them a book. Do you know any good book by trans people?" And I said, offer to do their hair, like your hairdresser. They would love probably to get that. Offer to do
yeah.
their hair. Ask them what they need. And the cousin was trans. I said, ask if she would like Sephora gift card.
Yeah.
Makeup. Like, ask, inquire. Don't just make assumptions that this is what they would benefit from. Just ask, and people would be happily to tell you what their needs are. So that would be my advice.
I feel like it's one of those things that sometimes we really overthink it.
So simple, right? Just,
Mhm.
yeah, just ask, what do you need from me? What can I
Yeah,
do for you?
because we don't know
Yeah,
what other people are thinking if we don't ask.
exactly.
So kind of like an extension of that, some recommendations for like close ones to trans and non-binary people. Like what recommendations would you have for like mental health providers who want to work with like gender diverse clients who want to be like more competent, more confident, more skilled in working with gender diverse clients? Are there any recommendations that you'd give?
Get in there. You already know this. Work with clients who have gender diverse experiences. Volunteer somewhere. Um, do all those kind of things. Read books. There's lots of books written by trans folks about their experiences. There's a lot of documentaries now coming out. There's a lot of film. Educate yourself. Get in there and join WPATH. Go to the conferences that they provide. There's really so much information out there these days. There's absolutely no excuse to be an ignorant
Mhm.
provider. There's no excuse, zero. And if you genuinely want to work with gender diverse individuals, you need to do your work. You need to roll up your sleeves and you need to understand and you need to learn. And hopefully, you're specialized in no more than three areas. And that way you can better serve everybody that you're working with. But yeah, it's just gaining that experience, just like anything else. It's like Malcolm Gladwell said, to become an expert, you need what, 10,000 hours of direct experience. It's like that, going there and getting you direct experience. There's nothing like it, nothing going
Mhm.
to replace it.
So, if someone was interested in working with you, how would they go about reaching out to you?
Easy website, book a consult. You have to have 15-minute consult with me because I need to make sure that I'm the right fit. Some people I consulted with, I can tell they need less direct approach. I can
Mhm.
just tell that I'll be like too much for them. And I'm not afraid to tell them, hey, I can just tell you that this is not going to be a good fit. Let me recommend somebody else. Also, I just want to be clear with people because a lot of people reach out to me for the consultation and they themselves have limited funds and they want to clarify, hey, will I get what I need from therapy with you, right? And that way I can be very clear about what I'm able to deliver and
Yeah.
what I'm not able to deliver based on what they can share with me in 15 minutes. So yeah, just book a consult and, you know, uh, just let's get on the phone and find out if I'm a good fit for it. It's pretty simple.
And what states would a client have to be located in to get services? Because I think you're not licensed in every state.
No,
So,
no, I'm not licensed in every state. California, Florida, Texas, and New York City. So you have to be resident of the states. If you're not resident of the states, um, and you're struggling to find somebody, I always tell people just email me and I may know somebody in your state. I may lead you to other resources where you can find gender therapists in your state. Um, like I said, I'm open book. I just started Q&A series on my channel where people are asking me direct specific questions. And a lot of people have been just emailing for resources, and I
mm,
encourage that. So if you need gender affirming ladder, I have a great resource list that somebody put together where there's providers by state who will evaluate you in one session to give you the gender
wow.
affirming. So I'm very, like I said, I think it's important to share knowledge, to exchange. Um, what you get, I gotta say this, what you get from my YouTube channel is exactly information anybody gets with me when they pay me. The difference is it's tailored to you, right?
Right.
It's tailored to your experience. So I want to be very clear is that the channel is really good resource. If you are in any state where you don't have anybody but just a generalist, if you find the videos that resonates with you or brings something for you or starts to for you to question things about yourself, takes that content into your therapy and say, can I process this a little bit more with you? When I watched this
Yeah.
video, here's what came up for me. So it's really important for people to know that I want to be very clear because if you can't afford me, the channel has wealth of information that
Mhm.
is, just very rich in material. And otherwise, just email me with questions and I'll answer them on Q&A.
Wonderful. So, is there anything else that we didn't touch on or didn't go in depth on that you'd want to share before we wrap up? Or even any projects you're working on that you want to plug or anything like that?
There's no projects that I don't want to plug. Um, I'm not a good plugger. Uh, no, I mean, I just want to let people know that there is a lot of resources I put out that are completely there for people. They're there for all of you to understand um, your your sense of self, to help you figure out where you fall on a gender spectrum, to get you figure out what goals to set for yourself. They're all there. They're on my website. They're on my YouTube channel. Q&A, I would say, is a great option for a lot of people who are watching this that have specific questions, as long as they're not diagnostic. It
Mhm.
would be unethical for me to diagnose somebody without knowing them.
Right.
Um, but a lot of questions are just general. Everybody's struggling with the same thing, dysphoria, just in different shape and form. So
Well,
that's
yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here, Dr. Z.
Thank you for
And
having me. I'm so excited that you're finishing your program. Like, I gotta
yeah.
talk to her.
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about that. But I mean, I hope today's video is like entertaining, informative, helpful for my audience. I'll put links down in the description below to your channel, to your website. So if people want more information. In closing, as always, be sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. My cat Tipsy and I love you all. And thank you for watching. Bye for
Thank you.
now.